Okay, Harry, what about tip number 4?
So the tip is work out why things work, and concretely, I mean, be really specific about what's happening. And this partly is on my mind because I wrote a blog post the other day about some research that I did with some great colleagues about how professional development works. And what we did, we looked at over 100 studies. We tried to pin down, like, what are the mechanisms of change. So instead of saying, like, if you think about the existing guidance on professional development, it's tended to be like, is the CPD collaborative? Does it include experts and so on? And it's like, well, that's all well and good, but if it includes experts, what are they doing? Like, are they prancing around on the stage dancing? Are they giving you really specific guidance? Are they sharing models? Are they getting you to practice your next lesson? And so on and so on. And what we learnt was the mechanisms that we pinned down could explain a substantial degree of the difference in how much of a difference CPD made to teachers. And so, you know, partly you could say, well, just go and learn from these mechanisms. But the underlying point is, like, can we be really, really specific about what's going on? And so in the same way, if you tell me, like, I had a great lesson with my Year 8 class the other day, and I'm like, oh, I have a nightmare with them, what do you do? And you tell me, like, well, I've developed a really strong culture of learning. I'm like, thanks so much, Freddie. That's like, that ain't going to help me, mate. But if you can tell me, we can talk habits again, like, well, I've built a habit that whenever they get stuck, they have to ask each other, and they're used to doing that, and they always do that before they ask me, and that then allows me to get around. Then I'm like, oh, that is a concrete thing I can do, and I will go and try and do that. So getting away from, I've become incredibly suspicious of the abstract, basically, like getting away from big words and big ideas, because, you know, it's like motherhood and that, like, strong culture of learning. No one's against that, but if I don't know what it means, I can't use it. And so really trying to get down to exactly what's going on in whatever it is we're trying to do.
Oh, this is a fascinating one, this, Harry. So again, a few things to say about this. The first, I love what you're doing here, because these are all kind of building on the prior things that you've said. It's working out what works. Often you'll have to try and strip out, you know, maybe you did 10 things that lesson. Well, what was the one or two things that you think had the biggest impact on how that worked? And let's communicate that. That feels really powerful. And secondly, it seems to me that this has kind of practical applications in terms of lesson observations, because that's where you often get these kind of vague things about your pace or the culture and so on and so forth. Whereas, again, it's the role of an observer for me to try and pinpoint, well, what was the one or two practical things that you did that either caused things to not work quite so well or caused things to work, and how can we build on that? And it's a challenge, though, isn't it? Kind of, there's all these kind of cliches and buzzwords in education. It's a challenge to actually pinpoint the practical, actionable things.
I mean, it is, but if you can't say what it is, you probably should be keeping your mouth closed. And the lesson observation feedback is a really good example. We've all had it of, like, you know, I just would have liked to see a bit more challenge. It's like, well, if you can't tell, you're meant to be the smart person in the room, you're the one observing me. If you can't tell me what that looks like or how you would have done it in the context of that lesson, I'm like, if I was smart enough to do it, I'd have done it. If you can't tell me how to do it, we're stuck, aren't we? And we talk about this in feedback, don't we? Like, you know, Dylan William has these examples of, you know, like, be more systematic, and students being like, well, if I knew how to be more systematic, I'd have done it in the first place. So yeah, I think it is, you know, if you are in the dangerous position that you and I are in, that we're asked to give advice to others, it is your professional responsibility to give that advice in a way that is comprehensible, yes, and that is unambiguous, if you really believe it. So yeah, like, we can use the abstract words, but no one's going to understand them, so you have to root them in the concrete. Just
to put you on the spot again, Harry, because you're too good at dealing with on the spot questions, so let me just ask you this one. Just thinking about lesson observations, because I think it's fascinating, both from the role of the person watching a lesson or a part of a lesson, but also from the role of the person who's being watched. Is there anything related to this tip about working out what works that can be either put in place before the lesson is watched by the teacher? And I'm thinking along the lines of, watch out for me doing this, I'm going to do, so, you know, deciding on a focus, or something that can happen in the feedback after the lesson that can really get to the nub of what's working or what's not working.
Well, I'm a really huge fan of instructional coaching and this idea of pinpointing one action step that needs work now. So it's not pace, it's not questioning, it's not culture, it's right down to, like, you know, let's say it were pace, it'd be like, okay, let's think about the way that you get transition from one activity to another, and try and find a way that you can give your instructions for a transition in 2 sentences instead of 10. And that is a viable, like, that's really clear. That's also a thing that I can viably fix next week in a way that pace is going to take me years to fix. And in the same way, I think, so in a sort of an idealised instructional coaching feedback meeting, you talk about one thing that's gone really well and one thing that you're going to work on. And as the coach, that it's sometimes you really have to narrow things down, because actually you've got someone who wants to talk about 7 things they notice they want to be better, and say, right, you're not going to manage all of them at once. Let's, well, you know, put that in those words, but like, let's just focus on this one thing for this week because that's achievable. And then when you do it, you're like, wow, it's working, and I feel better. So yeah, I think, again, you and I and probably most listeners have experienced, like, here's 10 things that went well and 10 things you need to work on. You don't do any of them. There's just no point in doing it. So don't, again, cut everything in half, and if it's lesson observation and feedback, cut it in half again and again, and then you might have something useful.
Fantastic.